The Sentinel cut through the void of space like a blade. Alia Carter stood on the bridge, her gaze fixed on the stars. But her thoughts were far from peaceful. The remnants of the Galactic Coalition had fractured into rival factions, each vying for dominance, leaving the galaxy vulnerable to the rise of tyrants. It had been a decade since the Coalition's collapse, and the galaxy was spiraling into an era of lawlessness. With every passing day, a new war broke out, and entire star systems were consumed in the flames of conflict. It was into this chaos that Earth had stepped, more a reluctant participant than a conqueror. Carter, once an idealistic officer in Earth's fleet, now stood at the helm of humanity's final defense. The Sentinel was Earth's last remaining warship, an ancient relic of the Coalition's golden years. The ship's crew, a mix of seasoned veterans and new recruits, watched her intently, waiting for the next order. Most of them had known nothing but war for their entire lives, and some had begun to doubt Earth's capacity to make a difference in the galaxy. Still, they followed Carter because they believed in her, or perhaps they simply had no other choice. "Captain, we've intercepted the transmission," said Lieutenant Callum, the communications officer, his voice cutting through the tension. He stood at his station, his hands hovering over the control panel as the encrypted signal flickered on the screen. Carter's mind snapped back to the present, and she approached the console, her boots clicking against the floor. "Put it through," she ordered. The message that came through was brief and haunting. A voice, strained with desperation, cut through the static of space. "This is Governor Ilara Voss of the Veneran System. Please, Earth, we need your help. The Zothraks are coming. They've already wiped out 4 of our colonies, and we are next. We cannot survive without assistance. Please, Earth, the galaxy cannot afford to lose another system." The transmission cut out abruptly, the silence on the bridge ringing like a death knell. Carter stood frozen for a moment. The Zothraks. Her mind flashed back to the terrifying tales she had heard as a child. Stories of the galaxy's most feared warlords, a species whose brutality knew no bounds. The Zothraks had been responsible for the collapse of the Galactic Coalition, using their overwhelming military power and ruthless tactics to break apart the once unified galaxy. And now, they were back. If Earth didn't intervene, entire star systems would fall under their iron grip. "Governor Voss is asking for our help," Carter said, her voice low, as if weighing the decision in her mind. "But it's more than that. The Zothraks are hunting down the last of the free worlds." "Captain," Callum said, his voice tinged with hesitation, "if we engage with them, we risk everything. The Sentinel alone can't stand up to their full fleet." Carter turned to face her crew. "We've been living in a galaxy where peace is a distant memory. But peace was never a right. It was something we fought for. And now, it's something we must fight for again. We have no choice. If we let the Zothraks win, there will be nothing left to save. No one will remember the name Earth." The crew exchanged glances, some apprehensive, others resolute. Carter felt the weight of their uncertainty, but she couldn't let it sway her. Earth had always been a symbol of resilience. It had built the Coalition, and now it could be the beacon that stood against the dark forces threatening to consume the galaxy. "Set a course for the Veneran System," Carter ordered. "Prepare the fleet for battle, and tell Governor Voss that Earth will answer the call." As the ship rumbled to life, and the stars stretched into streaks of light, Captain Alia Carter felt the undeniable weight of her decision. There was no turning back now. The battle for the galaxy's future had begun. The Sentinel surged forward, its engines roaring as it cut through the vast, empty expanse of space. The crew, all hands on deck, worked in synchronized tension. Every moment that passed carried the weight of 1,000 lives. Each star system they passed, each darkened sector, reminded them of the fragile peace that once held the galaxy together. Captain Alia Carter stood at the helm, her eyes trained on the holographic map of the galaxy projected before her. The Veneran System was far from their position, located in the outer rim, where the reach of galactic law had long been forgotten. This was lawless space now, a place where alliances were forged in the heat of battle, and trust was a currency few could afford. The Sentinel wasn't alone in this mission. Earth had long since abandoned the idea of a galactic empire, but their commitment to freedom had never wavered. The vessel's mission wasn't just to defend Earth's interests. It was to rally whatever fractured alliances remained to stand against the Zothrax. The problem was, the Zothrax were terrifyingly efficient at eradicating any opposition, and their reputation had already inspired fear in most of the galaxy's factions. "Captain, we're receiving a transmission," Lieutenant Callum said, his fingers dancing across his console. "It's from the Zorian Republic. They've requested an audience." Carter's lips tightened at the mention of the Zorians. Once an ally of Earth, they had become isolated after the Coalition's collapse. Their politics were as volatile as their military tactics, and they had a notorious history of backstabbing. She had no doubt that their request wasn't born out of goodwill. "Put it through," Carter replied, crossing her arms. The screen flickered to life, and a sharp-featured alien appeared. Tall, with blue-tinted skin and elaborate golden robes, Zorian Ambassador Kethar stood with an air of calculated indifference. His cold eyes locked onto Carter's image. "Captain Carter, how predictable," Kethar said, his voice smooth but edged with hidden venom. "The humans always come to the rescue, don't they? I trust you've received our message. We require your assistance in exchange for a partnership. Perhaps we can discuss terms once the Zothrax are dealt with. Of course, if you prefer to handle this alone, you are more than welcome to do so." Kethar's words dripped with an unspoken challenge. Earth's arrival in the Outer Rim was a sign of strength, but to the Zorians, it was also a political maneuver. Carter knew that the Zorians would never act without a hidden agenda. Any help they offered would come with strings attached. "I'm not here for political games, Ambassador," Carter responded, her tone firm. "The Zothrax are a threat to everyone, not just to you. If you want to be part of the solution, we'll talk later. Right now, we need your help to protect the Veneran system. If you refuse, Earth will act alone." The Zorian's lip curled into a slight sneer, but he said nothing. For a long moment, neither side spoke, the silence thick with tension. Carter knew this would not be an easy partnership, but she was running out of time. Every faction they encountered had their own agenda. None of them trusted each other, and few believed Earth could still pull off a victory. "We'll provide you with limited assistance," Kethar said finally, his eyes narrowing. "But don't mistake our cooperation for loyalty. After the Zothrax are dealt with, you'll owe the Zorian Republic more than you care to admit." The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving the crew in silence. "Carter," Lieutenant Callum said cautiously, "are we sure we can trust them?" Carter exhaled slowly, her gaze drifting back to the stars. "We don't have much of a choice. If we want to stand a chance, we'll have to make use of every ally we can find, even if it's only temporary." Her decision weighed heavily on her, but the clock was ticking. The Zothrax were out there, closing in on the Veneran system. She had no intention of letting them slip through her fingers. "Helm, prepare for hyperspace jump," Carter ordered. "Next stop, the Veneran system. Let's make sure we arrive in one piece." As the stars stretched into streaks of light around them, Captain Alia Carter felt the first tremor of doubt. The galaxy was fractured, and no matter how hard she tried to mend it, there would be no easy way to unite its disparate forces. Each step forward only seemed to pull them deeper into the web of intrigue and danger that had come to define this new era of galactic strife. And yet, as she looked out into the unknown, she knew that if there was to be any hope for the galaxy, it would start with Earth. The Sentinel might be the last bastion of hope, but that didn't mean it was invulnerable. Earth had to face its greatest challenge yet, and it would need every ounce of strength it could muster. The Sentinel broke through the vast emptiness of hyperspace with a violent jolt, the stars reappearing in a burst of brilliant white light. The Veneran system loomed ahead, a stark contrast to the darkness they had just traversed. Its planets, once thriving centers of culture and commerce, now lay cloaked in the shadow of an impending invasion. Carter stood at the front of the bridge, her arms crossed as she studied the holographic map of the system. The largest of the Veneran planets, Venera Prime, was at the center of the conflict. Thousands of refugees had already crowded into the planetary defenses, but Carter knew that even the mighty defenses of Venera Prime would buckle under the weight of a full Zothrax assault. "We're approaching the system," Lieutenant Callum said, his voice tight. "Venera Prime has broadcasted a distress signal. The Zothrax are only hours away. The refugees are already being moved to the safe zones, but I don't think they'll hold much longer." "How much time do we have?" Carter asked, turning to the communications officer. "About 5 hours," Callum responded, his expression grim. "Maybe less if the Zothrax push harder." Aelia nodded, the familiar weight of command settling on her shoulders. "All right, we don't have time for hesitation. Ready the crew. We'll need to make a coordinated strike to push them back." As the crew began to scramble into action, Carter's thoughts flickered to the Zorian Republic. Their limited assistance was better than none, but she knew better than to rely too heavily on them. The Zorians might have offered support, but Earth had long learned to trust no one without their own commitment. She only hoped they would keep their word and show up when it mattered. "Captain," Callum spoke again, his voice hesitant, "we've detected an unidentified fleet approaching the outer rim of the system. Their signatures match those of the Zothrax. They're closing in fast." Carter's heart skipped a beat. There was no time for second-guessing. The Zothrax were already here, and they were bringing the full force of their fleet to bear on the Veneran system. It would be a brutal fight, but Earth had come too far to retreat now. "Put the fleet on alert," she ordered, her voice steady. "Tell the Zorian delegation to stand by. We're going to need all the firepower we can get." With a sharp nod, Callum relayed the orders, his fingers flying over the controls. The Sentinel thrummed with activity as its crew moved to battle stations. Aelia turned her focus back to the stars. The Zothrax ships were like ominous shadows on the horizon, sleek and deadly, their dark hulls built for destruction. These were no mere pirates or raiders. They were a force to be reckoned with, bred for war. "We'll need to divide our forces to fight the Zothrax on 2 fronts," Carter said, turning to her tactical officer, Lieutenant Juno. "We'll take the lead on the defensive perimeter around Venera Prime. The 2nd Squadron should intercept their fleet before they can land." Juno, a seasoned officer who had seen more than her fair share of combat, nodded. "Understood, Captain. I'll send the orders to our fighter pilots." As the Sentinel moved into position, the first blast of enemy fire rocked the ship. The Zothrax had arrived with force, and they were immediately unleashing hell on the Veneran defenses. The crew braced for impact. The shields flared with energy, absorbing the worst of the incoming fire. Carter's jaw tightened as she watched the battle unfold, each second ticking by like a countdown. The Zothrax were relentless, hammering the planet's defenses with wave after wave of devastating strikes. "We need to neutralize their heavy artillery, or we won't last long enough to launch a counteroffensive," Carter said, her mind racing. "I'm working on it," Juno responded, her voice sharp. "Targeting the artillery now." On the ground, the Veneran civilians were being evacuated in haste, but Carter knew they wouldn't all make it. No matter how hard Earth fought, the Zothrax would leave nothing behind but destruction if they weren't stopped. "Captain," Lieutenant Callum interjected, his voice tight with concern. "The Zothrax fleet is overwhelming our defensive perimeter. I don't think we can hold them off much longer." Carter stared out at the looming threat, the dark ships moving inexorably forward. They were playing for keeps, and if Earth didn't act quickly, it would be the Veneran system's last stand. "Call the Zorians," Carter said. "It's time to see if they're true to their word." The Sentinel shook violently as another barrage from the Zothrax fleet slammed into its shields. On the bridge, Captain Carter held her composure as chaos erupted around her. Sparks flew from a ruptured console, and alarms blared, but her voice cut through the noise like a blade. "Shield status," she barked. "Down to 54% and dropping." Lieutenant Callum reported, his fingers flying across his station. "We're sustaining heavy fire on the starboard side. Divert power from non-essential systems to the shields. Hold the line," Carter ordered, her mind racing. Every second they held out gave the veteran civilians more time to evacuate. But at this rate, they wouldn't last much longer. The Zothrax fleet moved with brutal precision, their dark ships maneuvering to encircle the human and veteran defenders. Each volley of their plasma cannons carved through the void, leaving chaos in its wake. Carter could see the strain on her crew's faces as they fought to maintain control of the situation. "Captain," Lieutenant Juno called from the tactical station. "The Zothrax are deploying boarding pods. They're targeting the refugee ships." Carter's heart sank. The Zothrax weren't just aiming to destroy. They intended to capture as many civilians as possible. It was a grim reminder of their ruthless nature. They thrived on fear, using prisoners as leverage and breaking the spirit of entire systems. "Launch interceptors to take out those pods," Carter commanded, "and signal the veteran defense fleet to focus on covering the refugee ships." "Aye, Captain," Juno replied, relaying the orders. The battle raged on, a desperate dance of fire and fury. The Sentinel fired its railguns in rapid succession, sending streaks of molten metal tearing through the Zothrax formations. Carter watched as several enemy ships broke apart under the onslaught, but it wasn't enough. For every Zothrax vessel destroyed, 2 more seemed to take its place. "Captain," Callum's voice broke through her thoughts. "We're receiving a transmission from the Zorian fleet." Carter turned sharply. "Put it on screen." A holographic display flickered to life, revealing a Zorian officer dressed in ceremonial armor. His features were sharp and angular, his pale blue skin marked with intricate tattoos that glowed faintly in the dim light. "This is Commander Dren Vorton of the Zorian Republic," the officer said, his tone cool but resolute. "We have arrived to assist in the defense of the veteran system." Carter's jaw tightened. "You're late, Commander. We're already neck-deep in the fight." "Better late than never, Captain," Vorton replied with a faint smirk. "Our fleet will engage the Zothrax flank. Focus your efforts on protecting the refugees." Carter didn't waste time on a retort. "Understood. Don't make me regret trusting you." As the transmission ended, the Zorian fleet dropped out of hyperspace, their sleek, silver ships cutting through the void. True to Vorton's word, they immediately opened fire on the Zothrax flank, forcing the enemy to split their attention. "Zorian forces are drawing their fire," Juno reported, her voice tinged with cautious relief. "It's giving us breathing room, Captain." "Good," Carter said. "Let's use it. Redirect all firepower to clear the path for the refugee ships. We're getting them out of here." The combined human, veteran, and Zorian forces began to push back against the Zothrax assault. The tide of the battle shifted, but Carter knew it was far from over. The Zothrax were relentless, and their warships showed no signs of retreat. As the Sentinel led the charge, Carter's gaze fixed on the largest Zothrax vessel, a massive dreadnought bristling with weapons. It was the heart of their fleet, and she could feel its dark presence like a storm on the horizon. "Captain," Callum said, his voice low, "that dreadnought is powering up its main weapon." Carter's blood ran cold. The Zothrax were preparing to unleash devastation on an unimaginable scale. She had to act fast, or risk losing everything. "Focus all fire on that dreadnought," she ordered. "We take it out, or we die trying." The crew moved with grim determination, the Sentinel surging forward to meet the enemy head-on. As the battle reached its crescendo, Carter's resolve hardened. They would not fall. Not today. The Sentinel surged forward, engines burning at maximum thrust, as it closed the gap toward the Zothrax dreadnought. The hulking monstrosity dominated the battlefield, its spiked hull glowing with ominous crimson light as it charged its main weapon. Every second felt like an eternity as Captain Carter watched the energy signature on her tactical display grow more unstable. All railguns, target their weapon arrays. Carter shouted over the din of the battle. We can't let them fire that thing. Aye, Captain. Lieutenant Juno responded, her hands deftly locking firing solutions. Moments later, the Sentinel unleashed a furious barrage. Kinetic slugs tore through the void, slamming into the dreadnought's shields in a relentless assault. The Zorian fleet, true to their word, had divided the Zothrax forces, forcing them to split their fire. Commander Dren Vorten's flagship, a sleek destroyer, danced through enemy formations, raining pinpoint strikes on critical systems. The Venerans, emboldened by the reinforcements, held the defensive line around the refugee ships with renewed vigor. Captain, Callum's voice cut through the chaos. The Zothrax dreadnought is returning fire. Carter gripped her command console as the dreadnought's side-mounted cannons turned on the Sentinel. Massive bolts of plasma streaked across the battlefield, one narrowly missing their hull, while another struck their shields head-on. The ship shuddered violently, sparks raining from a nearby console. Shields down to 37%. Callum shouted, his voice tense. Hull integrity holding, but another hit like that. We won't get one, Carter snapped. Not if we keep them off balance. Helm, bring us in closer. Use the debris field for cover. Let's give them a moving target. The Sentinel dove into the remnants of a destroyed frigate, weaving between chunks of twisted metal and glowing wreckage. The maneuver forced the Zothrax gunners to recalibrate, buying precious seconds. Captain, the dreadnought's weapon array is nearly fully charged, Juno reported, urgency lacing her tone. We have to do something now. Carter's mind raced. The Sentinel didn't have the firepower to destroy the dreadnought outright, not before its weapon unleashed destruction. But maybe they didn't need to destroy it, just disrupt it. Juno, scan for any exposed conduits or weak points in the dreadnought's power system, Carter ordered. We don't need to stop the ship, we just need to stop the weapon. Juno's hands flew across her console. Got it. There's an exposed plasma relay near their aft section. If we hit it, it could cause a chain reaction, but we'll have to get dangerously close to do it. Helm, plot a course, Carter said without hesitation. We'll get in, hit it, and get out. Callum, divert all remaining shield power to the bow. We're going to punch through. The crew worked in unison, the tension on the bridge palpable. The Sentinel roared forward, dodging fire from the Zothrax fleet as it closed the distance to the dreadnought. Plasma bolts streaked past, close enough to scorch their hull, but the crew held their nerve. Target locked, Juno confirmed. We're in range. Fire, Carter commanded. The railguns fired in unison, sending a concentrated salvo straight into the exposed plasma relay. The impact was immediate. The dreadnought shuddered violently as explosions rippled along its hull, arcs of unstable energy leaping from one section to another. Direct hit, Juno shouted. The weapon is destabilizing. The dreadnought's glow flickered erratically, and Carter saw the telltale signs of a catastrophic failure. But the danger wasn't over yet. Captain, the dreadnought is going critical, Callum warned. We're in the blast radius. Helm, full reverse. Get us out of here, Carter yelled. The Sentinel veered away, engines straining as it sped from the impending explosion. Behind them, the dreadnought erupted in a blinding inferno, the shockwave tearing through the Zothrax fleet. Several nearby ships were caught in the blast, ripped apart by the sheer force of the explosion. As the light faded and the battlefield fell momentarily silent, Carter exhaled a shaky breath. They had done it. The dreadnought was destroyed, but the cost of their victory remained to be seen. Status report, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Minimal damage to the Sentinel, Callum replied. The Zorian fleet is mopping up the remaining Zothrax forces. The refugee ships are intact. Carter allowed herself a moment of relief. The battle was turning in their favor, but she knew this was only one victory in a much larger war. The Zothrax weren't finished, and neither were they. The bridge of the Sentinel was filled with the hum of systems rebooting and the faint crackle of damaged consoles. Captain Carter leaned back in her chair, wiping sweat from her brow. Around her, the crew was alive with a mix of relief and urgency, tending to the aftermath of the battle. "The Zothrax fleet is retreating," Juno reported, her voice carrying a cautious optimism. "We've secured the area." Cheers erupted across the bridge, though they were tempered by exhaustion. Carter allowed them a brief moment to savor the victory before raising her hand to call for silence. "Good work, everyone," she said firmly. "But this fight isn't over. Damage report." Callum's fingers danced over his console. "We've sustained moderate hull damage, and our shields are critically low. Weapon systems are operational, but the railguns are running hot. We'll need to cool them down before sustained use. Engines are stable, though we're down to 63% efficiency." "And the refugees?" Carter asked. "The Veneran convoy reports no casualties," Callum replied with a hint of pride. "Commander Dren Vorton's fleet took heavy losses, but they're regrouping. The Zorian fleet remains operational, though their admiral requests immediate communication." Carter nodded. "Patched the admiral through." The main screen flickered to life, revealing Admiral Kaldarian, the Zorian fleet commander. His sharp, aquiline features were marred by a deep cut along his temple, but his golden eyes were steady. "Captain Carter," Darian began, his tone even, "your intervention turned the tide of this battle. On behalf of the Zorian people, I offer my gratitude." "We're all in this together, Admiral," Carter replied, her voice laced with sincerity. "But this victory came at a cost. The Zothrax won't stay down for long, and we've exposed ourselves to their wrath." Darian's expression darkened. "Indeed. My intelligence officers report that the Zothrax dreadnought was not their flagship. It was one of many. Their main fleet is still out there, regrouping. They will retaliate." Carter's jaw tightened. "Then we need to move quickly. This system is no longer safe. We have to evacuate the refugees to a more secure location and prepare for their counterstrike." Darian inclined his head. "Agreed. My fleet will escort the Venerans to Zoreth Prime, where they can find temporary refuge. But we cannot fight this war alone. The galaxy must stand united against the Zothrax." Carter's gaze hardened. "And that's exactly what they fear. They thrive on chaos, on division. If we're going to stop them, we need to bring the fractured factions together." The screen flickered off as the conversation ended, leaving Carter to ponder the weight of the situation. She turned to Juno. "Plot a course to Zoreth Prime. And Callum, send a message to our allies. The time for hiding is over. We're calling for a summit." As the Sentinel prepared to jump to hyperspace, Carter couldn't shake the feeling that this victory was a prelude to something far greater. The Zothrax were wounded, but far from defeated. And if the galaxy didn't unite soon, there wouldn't be a galaxy left to save. The journey to Zoreth Prime was uneventful, yet the tension on the Sentinel grew with every passing moment. Captain Carter stood at the front of the bridge, arms crossed, staring at the swirling vortex of hyperspace. Her mind raced with the enormity of what lay ahead. The battle had been hard-fought, but it was merely a prelude to a greater war, a war that could only be won if the galaxy's fractured factions stood together. "Captain, we're approaching Zoreth Prime," Juno announced, her voice breaking Carter's reverie. "Dropping out of hyperspace now." The Sentinel emerged into real space, and the view before them took Carter's breath away. Zoreth Prime was a jewel of a planet, its surface glittering with sprawling cities that floated on massive platforms above sapphire oceans. The orbital ring surrounding the planet was a marvel of engineering, bustling with ships of every design. It was a testament to Zorian ingenuity and their determination to hold out against the Zothrax. "Incoming transmission from Zorian High Command," Callum said. "Put it through," Carter replied. The screen flickered to life, revealing the Zorian Council chamber. At its center stood Admiral Darian, flanked by members of the Zorian High Council. Their ornate robes and stern expressions spoke of their importance, But Carter noted the weariness in their eyes. The war had taken its toll on everyone. "Captain Carter," Darien began, his tone formal but tinged with urgency. "Welcome to Zoreth Prime. The Council has convened to discuss the next steps in our fight against the Zothrax. We trust you'll join us." "I wouldn't miss it," Carter said. "But this can't just be about us. If we're going to win, we need more than just Zorian and human forces. We need the galaxy." Darien nodded. "That is why we've sent invitations to representatives of the other factions, the Venerans, the Torval Syndicate, and even the enigmatic Thalnar Collective. Whether they respond, however, remains to be seen." The mention of the Thalnar made Carter's stomach tighten. The Thalnar were a mysterious and highly advanced species that had isolated themselves for centuries, refusing to involve themselves in galactic affairs. If they could be convinced to join the fight, it would be a game changer, but convincing them was a monumental task. "Understood," Carter replied. "We'll need to make a compelling case. I'll prepare my arguments and join the Council shortly." The transmission ended, and Carter turned to her crew. "This is it. We're not just fighting for Earth anymore. We're fighting for the survival of everyone. The Zothrax thrive on division, and we're going to show them that their time is over." As Carter made her way to the Council chamber, she couldn't help but feel the weight of history pressing down on her. The room was filled with representatives from various factions, many of whom eyed each other with suspicion. Old rivalries and grudges ran deep, and Carter knew that uniting them would be as difficult as facing the Zothrax themselves. Admiral Darien introduced her, and Carter stepped forward, her voice strong and steady. "We all have our differences," she began, her eyes sweeping across the room. "But those differences pale in comparison to the threat we face. The Zothrax are not just enemies of Earth or Zoreth. They are enemies of life itself. They will not stop until every world is ash and every star is dark." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "But together, we can stop them. Together, we are stronger than they ever anticipated. Let this be the moment we put aside our differences and fight as one. Not just for survival, but for a future where our children can live free." The chamber erupted into murmurs, some skeptical, others inspired. Carter stepped back, knowing the real work of negotiation and persuasion was just beginning. She caught Darien's eye, and he gave her a subtle nod of approval. As the meeting continued, Carter felt a spark of hope. The galaxy was fractured, but not broken. And if they could rally together, they just might stand a chance. The council chamber erupted into heated debate. Voices clashed as representatives from the galaxy's many factions aired their grievances. The Veneran envoy, a stern woman clad in flowing green robes, argued about resources. A Torval Syndicate leader snarled about trust, his cybernetic implants gleaming under the chamber lights. Even the stoic Thalnar delegate, a towering figure wreathed in an aura of shimmering light, spoke in cryptic riddles that revealed their reluctance to join the fray. Captain Carter stood at the center of it all, her hands resting firmly on the podium. Her heart pounded, but she kept her voice steady. "Enough," she commanded, her voice cutting through the cacophony. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to her. "This isn't about your past grudges or your political squabbles," Carter said, her gaze sweeping across the room. "This is about survival. The Zothrax don't care about your borders, your treaties, or your histories. They care about one thing: domination. And if we don't stand together, they'll pick us off one by one." The Veneran envoy crossed her arms. "Unity is a noble goal, Captain, but what assurances do we have that the others won't betray us? The Torval Syndicate, for example, has a history of opportunism." The Torval leader bristled but smirked. "And the Venerans have always been quick to abandon their allies when the tides turn." Carter slammed her hand on the podium. "Enough. The Zothrax are already tearing us apart, and you're letting them win without firing another shot. Look around you. Do you want your worlds to fall because you couldn't see past your own egos?" Silence fell again, but this time it was heavier, leaden with the weight of realization. Carter softened her tone. We've already shown what we can do when we fight together. At Venera 7, Zorian ships shielded human transports. At the Battle of Orcs Nebula, Torval fighters bought us time to evacuate millions. These aren't just battles. They're proof that we're stronger together. The Thalnar delegate stepped forward, their shimmering aura intensifying. When they spoke, their voice resonated with a musical quality that sent chills down Carter's spine. Words are fleeting, Captain Carter. Convince us with action. What is your plan to unite this fractured galaxy and defeat the Zothrax? Carter took a deep breath. This was the moment. The Zothrax rely on their fleet's size and their ability to divide us. But we've identified a critical vulnerability. A central command station that coordinates their forces. If we can take it out, their fleet will descend into chaos. She glanced around the room, meeting each representative's gaze. But we can't do it alone. We need every faction's strength, Veneran ingenuity, Torval firepower, Thalnar technology, and Zorian discipline. Together, we can strike a blow so decisive that the Zothrax will never recover. The chamber erupted again, but this time the tone was different. The representatives weren't arguing against Carter, they were debating how to contribute. Slowly but surely, the room shifted from discord to consensus. Admiral Darien stepped to Carter's side, his golden eyes gleaming with approval. It seems you've lit the spark, Captain. Now it's time to fan the flames. Hours later, the plan was finalized. The factions had pledged their forces, and the first coordinated strike against the Zothrax was set in motion. As Carter returned to the Sentinel, she felt a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. The galaxy was far from unified, but this alliance was a start. Standing on the bridge, Carter addressed her crew. We've done the impossible before, and we'll do it again. This isn't just about Earth. It's about a galaxy that refused to bow to tyranny. Let's show them what humanity, and our allies, are made of. As the Sentinel prepared to jump to its next destination, Carter allowed herself a moment of hope. The Zothrax were powerful, but for the first time, the galaxy was united. And that, she knew, was a force no enemy could withstand.